Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Radiant Central, and I'm your host, Natasha St. Michael, and thank you so much for joining me. So recently I received a question about peanut butter, the peanut butter sold in a health food store. The person was wondering if the peanut butter that's sold fresh, that's made at the health food store out of roasted nuts, is this something they can eat, or is it something that they should be avoiding? Can it be part of a healthy diet? Is that peanut butter rancid because it's been made out of roasted peanuts? Great question. And so they're wondering what my opinion is on this subject. Great question. And I think first I'll talk a little bit about nuts and seeds. Okay. And when it comes down to nuts and seeds, is that as a consumer, you're always better off buying nuts and seeds and eating nuts and seeds that are raw, okay, that haven't been processed, because mainly the main thing is that with a lot of nuts and seeds is that the oils and the fats can be quite delicate. And what ends up happening is that if the nuts and seeds have been cooked or roasted or fried under a high temperature, it can damage the oils and the fats within the nuts and seeds. Okay, and that is an issue with some nuts and seeds. Some nuts and seeds, the oils are more resistant than others. And so it's always best, we know that when you're cooking anything, you're going to lose some nutrients. And so the same thing goes with nuts and seeds. It's not like you're going to lose all. Okay, it's not like it's suddenly you're eating nuts and seeds turn into the most carcinogenic thing on earth once some heat has been put on them. But a better alternative is always to eat them raw. Okay, if you're trying to eat the most pristine food on earth, you'd want to go with the raw ones. Okay, or you can soak them and you can dehydrate them. You can even sun dry them too. Myself, during the dry season here in Bali, a lot of times I will actually soak and sun dry my nuts and seeds. And when I lived in Canada, I used to soak them and put them in a dehydrator, but I don't have a dehydrator here, so I don't do that. But I always prefer to go more with the raw ones. And what we can see too is just what's sold at a health food store and in grocery stores as well, that a lot of nut oils are always cold pressed. And that's because it's trying to maintain and not damage those delicate oils by heating the nuts at a higher temperature to extract the oil. They know that it's going to damage it, the taste will go bad, it'll become rancid, and you can taste it. So you'll see that, like most oils that are extracted from nuts, are usually cold pressed, okay? And that gives you an indication right there that it's always better to not be heating these things up, okay? But when it comes down to some nuts are roasted, and myself, I do once in a while roast nuts at home. I prefer to do that at home as opposed to buying it, because at least I know that I'm dry roasting it. And what I do is, if I do roast any nuts or seeds, is I dry roast them at a very, very low temperature. So I have like a little toaster oven, and I'll put them in there and roast them for a long period of time at the lowest temperature. The lowest it can go, the oven, that's where I put it at. Okay, so here it's like 100 degrees Celsius, which is about 200 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's what I do. If you can get it even lower, great. And you just have to roast it at a longer period of time, but that's something you can do too. It's kind of like the lower the temperature, the more that you're not going to hurt or damage those oils, okay? But you are cooking it. So that's something to take into consideration. So I do both. I have it raw, and I do my own home roasting. The one thing that I like to avoid when I'm buying nuts and seeds is I try to avoid buying them that they've been cooked in oils, they've got some weird seasoning on that. I'd rather do all that at home. So like, let's say I do want to like cook some seeds or nuts and season them and put a little bit of oil on them, that's fine. I do it at home, but I'd rather do it at home where I know that I'm using quality ingredients and I'm not just buying it from some store that they're using like the worst oil and it's just like, it could even be full of MSG and just like weird stuff, right? So it's better to do that stuff at home. I always say, fresh, cooked at home, much better. So that's always the direction I go with that. Now, when it comes down to nut butters, I feel that the bigger issue I would have with nut butters is more about the freshness of it than as opposed to them using a roasted nut or a raw nut. You're always, of course, better off having a raw nut butter, but like peanut butter, it's much better if it's roasted. Anyone's ever had a raw peanut butter, it would probably taste kind of funny. Here in Indonesia, we buy a lot of raw nuts and we'll boil them as opposed to roasting them, but I can never imagine actually using those raw nuts in a peanut butter. But if you want to do that, you can. There's definitely raw peanuts on the market to do that. And you can always roast your own nuts at home if you feel better about it at a super low temperature, and then make a nut butter out of that. You know, nowadays too, you can make a nut butter at home easily, either with like a high-speed, powerful blender, or even with a juicer. Some juicers actually have a mechanism where you can make your own nut butters. And so that, I would say, is always a much better option, is making this stuff fresh and homemade. And so the one thing I would say about any of sort of the pre-made bottled nut or seed butters that you get at the health food store, the grocery store, the main thing is that you always want to get a pure product. And what's even better is if they actually label when it's been processed and made, because really you want to be eating that stuff fresh. Especially once you open up that bottle, you need to be eating up that nut butter or that seed butter within, I would say, a few weeks, or like maximum 2 or 3 months. I wouldn't have that stuff sitting around, because the main thing is that's when it's going bad. I have more of an issue of it oxidizing and the elements getting into it and making it go rancid that way, as opposed to them using a cooked nut to make it. That's my view of it, is that the longer that kind of stuff sits, the more potential you have of it going bad. And also another thing too to consider as well is that oil is a natural preservative. Okay, so when you're buying like a nut butter or seed butter and has that oil at the top, that's a good thing, because it's sealing the butter that's below it from air and from the elements. Okay, so it's preserving it and preventing it from going bad as well. So that's something to take into consideration, is that you never want to remove that thick oil on top. And if you don't have that thick oil on top, you can always add it in, because that too will just protect it. And I'd also suggest refrigerating it after being opened. Even though they say you don't have to, I would. So when it comes down to the peanut butter sold at the grocery store, the health food store, that's been made there. You know, a lot of times you'll see the machine where it's got the peanuts and they make it right there. If it's made right there and it's fresh, and you know that there's a fast turnover, then I don't see it as being such a problem. Because with peanut butter, compared to any other nut and seed, is that peanuts, the actual oil in peanuts, is heat resistant. The problem with peanut oil that's sold at a grocery store, a health food store, is that it's been extracted by a chemical solvent. That's why it's not considered so much of a health food. But if it was not extracted from the peanuts through a chemical solvent, but is extracted perhaps cold press or another way, peanut oil is actually known to be heat resistant. So I would say, out of all the nuts and seeds, having roasted peanut butter that's been made on the spot and that's fresh, and you're going to eat it within, especially if peanut butter goes bad quite quickly, you're going to eat it within like a week or two after buying it, I don't see it as being as much of an issue as opposed to having other nuts and seeds that you know the oils are so delicate that it goes bad much quicker. Okay, so that's something to take into consideration when it comes down to peanuts. Other nuts and seeds can go bad quicker. Okay, and that's something to look into. It's like, you know, if you're going to roast it, how quickly does it go bad? How long does it stay fresh? You know, I would say with any of these things, with cooking anything, it's like once it's cooked, you want to eat it immediately. You don't want it sitting around for a long time. And it's the same thing with processing it down into a powder, or processing it into a nut butter. It's like you want to eat that stuff fast, because every day it's sitting, it's like it's losing its nutrition. It's oxidizing. It's slowly going bad. So eat it quickly. That's what's most important. And whenever you're buying a nut butter from a health food store, grocery store, always look at the label just to make sure that it's pure. You know, and to make sure they're not using weird oils, because sometimes they'll use like a hydrogenated oil, or they'll use like a vegetable oil or soybean oil, oils that perhaps you don't want to be eating. Okay, so you always want to make sure it's a pure product, and just because it's sold at a health food store doesn't necessarily mean they've checked it to make sure it's a pure product. Okay, so it's always good to take that extra 2 seconds to read the label to make sure that you're spending money on a quality product. It's always about that. Okay, so these are my tips and suggestions about nut butters. And I'm wishing everyone a super fabulous day, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.